Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Liu, and I will be your host for today's Think with ABD podcast. Cities have been around for centuries and have survived pandemics with increasing efforts of a social distancing and all sort of health protocols. We know one day that COVID-19 will all be in history, but we are also sure that this pandemic is going to change our city forever. In today's Think with ABD's podcast, we have invited Wafic El-Assi. Wafic is an urban tech enthusiast, ex-data scientist, and currently strategy and operation manager at Uber Canada. A transportation modeler by training, Wafic is passionate about almost everything that lies at the intersection of cities, technology, and data. Please join me in welcoming Wafic.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction, Michelle.
Yeah, so maybe to start off our conversation, might I ask you to briefly describe what urban tech is?
For sure, urban tech is quite the term. It doesn't have a strict definition, but a few VC funds and bodies in the US and Europe have defined it as anything that is technology that makes cities and urban spaces more connected, livable, and efficient. So you can think of urban tech as touching sectors like real estate, transportation, mobility, delivery services, and potentially even a little bit of health tech and cybersecurity that can have or has anything to do with cities overall.
Interesting. So basically, I guess technology, anything touching urban living and lifestyle, etc. In these days, one of the most commonly used words in conversation is social distancing, as we are in the weeknight of self-isolation. So how do you see social distancing affect the public in using transportation? Maybe not just in the context of what people do during the quarantine, but also in the post-COVID-19 era.
For sure. I mean, it's no secret that when we look at public transportation, it's exhibiting quite a decline in ridership overall. To get a better sense of transportation, let's split it into two different categories. Let's talk about transportation as shared mobility and as private owned transportation. So when we talk about shared mobility, we're thinking public transit, we're thinking ride hailing services. Those both have been severely impacted, and there's a little bit of a lack of trust when it comes to those bodies because of them potentially being mediums carrying infectious diseases at this stage. On the other hand, personal mobility and active transportation like walking or cycling is seeing kind of a surge in a sense. We hear news in China and other parts of the world where you have an increase in sales and car ownership right now because of the impacts of the pandemic. We also see in the US, I read that in the information a couple of days ago, there's an increase in e-scooter sales, and that's expected to be kind of a medium for transportation in the future. Mm-hmm. So it's no secret that transportation has been impacted severely, but I do think that transportation will see recovery the same way the entire world will see the recovery in COVID. In the end of the day, we need to be able to move, and while movement is halted right now, that after we restore confidence in our different transportation services, we'll slowly see people go back and take on whether it's ride sharing or public transit. And we also, I think, from my opinion, we'll see also an increase in active transportation, and we'll see that services like Climb or Jump in the US or anything that has to do with e-scooters and e-bikes will have a lot of allure simply because they're open air and they may be more trustworthy if we put the proper disinfection procedures in place for those kind of modes.
Wafic, I saw an astonishing number, like by 2025, the global e-bike market will be over 27 billion USD. In fact, a few years ago, China's bike-sharing economy caught many investors' attention, and they were certainly up and down there. I guess my question is that, considering the geography differences and population density comparing North America and Asia, how do you see the West of building bike-sharing services like that?
For sure. I mean, you touched on one of the requirements of success, and it's density. Cities like Toronto or New York or Los Angeles, maybe not Los Angeles, but San Francisco, where you have enough density to actually have such services spread around, that'll be crucial for its success. I think over time as well, if we were to think about the future of cities in general and how can urban space be reallocated, we are capable of rezoning multiple areas in the suburbs to actually be open for, say, multi-purpose residential units or multi-story residential units, and therefore creating enough density to actually have people or enough people being able to use these services to move around. And I think that's where I hope to see the world moves, but who knows if that's going to be the case or not.
Right, right, for sure. And I don't want to go deep in terms of kind of urban densification. And I think that's one of the attractiveness of being inside of city, because we're to be connected to different individual bonds to each other, right? But it's because of we have seen so far, people are more and more concerned urban density, especially in the post-COVID-19. There's a kind of reverse trend in urban densification, right? And I think there's a survey done by Status Canada last year talk about with increasing living costs in major cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, there's a reverse trend of people are moving out of the city. And there was a roughly 76,000 of Canadians actually moved from those major cities to respective provinces. And I think, with the COVID-19 situation and people are more concerned about getting into close proximity with strangers. And what do you think about that? What do you think about this trend and I guess, being escalated?
For sure. I mean, it's a very important question. And historically, when we look at how cities have evolved, especially post-pandemics, we see movement in and out all the time. But the theme or the overall trend is that cities or urbanization has always triumphed. When we look at, say, the Spanish flu or the Black Death that infected Europe, cities were the center of that infectious disease. But over time, cities remained very strong and people ended up going to cities and density exploded. And I don't expect COVID right now to have any kind of a different effect. I think over time, we will still continue to see an increase in people flocking to cities simply because that's where the opportunity is, that's where jobs are, that's where you can make the most out of personal connections, that's where you can have a proper community with small shops intermixed with larger box stores around you. Like, it is the ideal location for someone who is trying to identify and find themselves in a very crowded world. But we have to restore confidence. And we have to kind of rethink how cities should be shaped and how urban space should be allocated. We need to think about cities that are less focused on the vehicle, more focused on the person. And when we do that, we can end up with cities that are less polluted, cities that have less traffic, and cities that are much more attractive to different segments of the population.
Interesting. I like the way you say we should build a city based on humans and not just other things. So can you maybe elaborate a bit on that? When you're thinking about building a city that is putting human at the center of all the designs, how do you see maybe transportation play the role there?
I mean, I think transportation are more or less the arteries of cities, and how transportation or how we think about transportation planning ends up shaping how our cities look like overall. Right now, or historically, if you think about the 1950s, we always thought about how we can design for cars and how they need to be, how cars need to be the center of our existence. And that's why you have the highways and the way they're built in the US. That's why you have the suburbs as the center of population for potentially more affluent societies. But in reality, as we grow and continue to expand from a population standpoint, we need to think about how we can move beyond vehicles. That's important for us, not just to take care of our cities, but to take care of our environment. So when we talk about how we can expand sidewalks, for example, one, to ensure enough spacing, and two, to be able to encourage pedestrian movement. And when we talk about how we want to expand bicycle infrastructure, which is happening all around the world, in order to also reduce congestion and be able to allow people to have a cheaper mode of transportation, I think that'll be critical in how cities need to adapt, and that will shape how cities will emerge out of COVID in the near future.
So I guess with increasing effort into expanding kind of personal space, reducing maybe close proximity to others and to better ensure the safety protocols always being enforced, at least in the foreseeable future. So that's kind of a shift gear a little bit in terms of talking about working from home or digital workforce. And I'm pretty sure you're aware of a lot of the technology companies decided to allow the employee to work from home for the rest of the year. And I think the CEO of Twitter mentioned they actually don't mind employee working from home forever. So I guess in this current environment, what do you think about that? What do you think about how people kind of maybe stay away from physical co-location? How does that affect kind of a productivity, and what do you think this is going to do with the society or the city by themselves?
I mean, I think it works for Twitter. Not sure if it will work for everyone else. Yes, Twitter companies like Twitter came out and said you can work from home indefinitely if you choose to. Companies like Google and Facebook came out and said you could potentially work from home until the end of the year. But we also saw Elon Musk and Tesla really pushing to get back to working at their manufacturing sites. And we saw Apple encouraging their employees to come back to their offices because hardware can't be built, at least right now, virtually. So there are different types of jobs, and some jobs allow you to work from home while many others don't. And I think companies in general will be cost driven and profit driven, and where possible, they will look for ways to shed real estate costs and improve their margins, and that may mean less offices. But I'm very curious about the data that's being used right now, and companies are monitoring this data, whether it's code pushes or sale numbers or other stuff that can reflect how well work from home is working. And I think right now, in my opinion, all data we're capturing right now is fairly skewed and biased, simply because of the nature of COVID and the kind of mentality we have been developing in terms of like survival instincts to get out of this disease. But over time, the value of working in the office is going to come back to the discussion. And we're going to talk about the creativity that comes out from agglomerating people together and the connections we build and the efficiency that results from that kind of proximity. It's not going to be one tail, it's going to be multiple tails. And I do agree with Eric Schmidt's comments as well, where he came out and said we expect to see an increase in satellite offices, where people will have multiple options, but many of them will still be expected to work from the office many days of the week. But in order to, one, limit the fear of using public transit for long distances, and to enable people to work from offices with less commute time, we will have these satellite offices in different central business districts around the world. And people will be able to basically attend these offices instead of having to go all the way to, say, the downtown core. And that will also shape the future of cities, because it will shape how we can expand and rezone our urban space in a way that encompasses density, but not necessarily as much density as you see right now in major hubs around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we can start thinking about redesigning the whole city based on the needs and all the requirements of running different activities, and I think that would be the best for everybody. And considering now we overly populate certain area and not so much in another, right? Especially in Canada. So, okay. I guess after you talk about digital workforce and how does it gonna affect the cities? So I would say, the broader speaking, how do you see this kind of affect also the sharing economy? Because it's something rarely new, come out in the past decades, right? And then especially after recessions, and people are thinking about the economies, I think about what's the best way of utilizing those underutilized assets. How do you see this, especially after COVID-19?
I mean, it's a very interesting question, because if you look at innovation historically, when you think about the Googles and Alphabets of the world, they were really springing out of garages here and there in the suburbs. But when you talk about the Ubers and Airbnbs and WeWorks of the world, they are the product of city living, and they only make sense because of the density and the economies of scale you get from these. And right now you see Airbnb and WeWork and Uber and Lyft and other companies suffering significantly from the decline in mobility and the kind of the halt of movement internationally, while you see other kinds of sharing economy companies such as like Uber Eats or Instacart thriving in this environment because of the convenience they deliver, especially in the kind of era we are in right now, if you wish. And basically, I think over time we should lean in to the sharing economy rather than pull out. In my opinion, the sharing economy adds resilience to city infrastructure rather than the opposite. Think of it as a variable cost versus a fixed cost. If you have hotels or subway lines, those are fixed costs that you can't really pull out from when you need to dial down mobility or dial down the economy in general, while sharing economy can be dialed down, dialed back up depending on your need. And when we talk about, if we were to tie back to COVID, when we talk about the possibility of multiple pandemics or a W-shaped recovery, you will need to dial down, dial back up the economy multiple times. And as a result, you can lean into the sharing economy and actually work together. Private companies need to do the same with their public counterparts or the municipalities they operate within. You can benefit from that flexibility. So if we want to be more specific, you can work with WeWork to have uh, different office allocations for people for a temporary period of time across different central business districts, implementing that kind of satellite office mentality temporarily and making sure you have the right disinfection policy in place to protect people as they're working versus having to buy real estate here and there permanently. You can work with Uber and other ride-sharing companies to implement transit partnerships and move people around and benefit the most vulnerable of us who can't afford to buy a car or can't afford to move and locate closer to work if they need to, and potentially even can't even afford to work from home because their work doesn't allow them to operate from their homes. So you can partner with these companies to offer that kind of transportation. And I think the city of Innisfil is a good example in Canada. They do just that in order to just have that kind of flexibility and resilience in your infrastructure overall.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. What do you think about consumer going to kind of adjust to the new norm? And I think we talk about underutilization of a lot of asset, and I think car being swans, and I think nowadays, especially when going back to kind of reintegrating back to social life, how do you see in terms of the challenges of sharing economies companies and have to do in order to maybe encourage consumer to trust, save to use, the same vehicles as someone else?
For sure. I mean, it's an interesting time to be alive because the macroeconomic trends suggest that on one end, a lot of people are out of work and the sharing economy kind of offers them the possibility to get a job temporarily as they find their footing or potentially permanently depending on the kind of income structure you can put together. And on the other hand, because of these layoffs and because of the halt in mobility, the ability to spend or disposable income is fairly limited. So you kind of want to get the best deal for your buck. So again, it plays into the flexibility of the sharing economy to an extent, not necessarily 100%. We see many initiatives being implemented by these companies right now to restore confidence. For example, Uber and Lyft both came out and said you have to wear face masks, trying to deliver disinfectants and wipes to drivers in order to be able to carry that cost and help them in making sure their vehicles are as clean as possible. Taxis, although a bit outside the sharing economy, are investigating having plexiglass in order to protect their drivers and the riders in the backseat. But I think overall, these are still more appealing alternatives than having to be in mass transit, moving from one place to another, because the number of people you're sharing the space with is limited. So they play a nice incremental step to the return to normalcy, but a lot of effort is needed from these companies to assure both their supplier of those services, such as drivers, for example, and the consumers of these services, such as riders in the case of ride hailing, to feel comfortable in sharing that space. And that effort is, I think, underway in many companies.
For sure. I just want to share maybe my experience as a consumer. I really love the slogan "Move What Matters," because if I think about for myself, I don't drive and I don't own a car, and I need to get to somewhere, and I know right now I shouldn't go out, but if there's something I really have to get out, for whatever reason, and there's no other transportation available, and then for me, that Uber ride becomes like kind of a necessity for me. So I think this is just going to speak true to a lot of the individuals just like myself, and then also thinking about like food delivery and stuff like that, and then for young professional like myself, and I think it's definitely something we kind of fall back on, that probably without thinking too much before COVID-19. Now it's something we feel like, oh, we really glad that we actually have the option just to order something, right?
I mean, 100%. I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah.
especially as sorry, just to interrupt, but there's a
No
reason
problem.
why municipalities and governments deemed these services as essential, and they kept them running versus shutting them down completely. And they have become more essential to our lives in different ways, and they probably will continue to be. But the hope is that there's always growing collaboration between these different entities, public and private, so that the benefit is not just to young professionals like myself or you, but also to the wider population overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also like the way you were speaking about economics, right? And I think at the end of the day, you and I, we're both consumers. We look at a balance sheet, we look at how much price we're gonna pay.
Yeah.
Either I had to rent a car and drive to a location and take out my food, or I pay for someone deliver for me, and that is a shared cost among other people. So I think to me, like the math, if it work out okay, additional fee, that's fine here. So I guess given all has been discussed in terms of maybe we're gonna relocate our society in terms of the resources and the future of the work, and the fact the cities are mostly affected by COVID-19. So what do you think? Do you think the city will bounce back eventually?
I am bullish on cities. I think cities will bounce back. I think cities will bounce back in a new way. I believe that COVID accelerated many things we used to discuss in the past, such as the future of work. And I think it also will accelerate how cities are designed and reimagined. We heard about the 15-minute neighborhood that the mayor of Paris proposed, where basically everything you need from your local coffee shop to your job to your kids' daycare or school will be a 15-minute walk. And that's kind of how Paris is reimagining itself post this pandemic. We heard about how London and Toronto are reimagining streets, expanding sidewalks, increasing bicycle infrastructure, and closing down multiple roads in order to facilitate the recovery of cities and be able to give people enough space to move around and continue their life as normal. And with that direction, I'm very hopeful about the future of cities, and because it's seems like it's going in a direction where you have less pollution, less traffic, less noise, but maintaining the benefits of density and the benefits of spontaneous interactions and the benefits of being within a community overall. So that's why I'm fairly bullish on cities. So yes, cities will bounce back as they bounce back in the past, and I look forward to see that bounce back happen.
That's amazing. I guess that just sums up today's talk. Thank you very much, Wafic, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for having me.